Welcome from me, Guy Monson, to Saracen's 6-Minute Strategy. As the new Trump White House issues a barrage of executive orders, 4 key presidential priorities have quickly emerged: tax cuts, immigration, deregulation and tariffs. These are the topics I'll be discussing today with our chief economist, Subitha Subramaniam. And next month I head to Washington to meet politicians, academics and business leaders in person. For investors though, 2 themes already stand out. First, despite a few notable exceptions, President Trump has assembled a competent and experienced cabinet. They're likely to be nimble and pragmatic and will probably work to far tighter timetables than Washington is used to. Second, there is still one big elephant in the room, and that's the US deficit. With 30-year Treasury yields already hovering near 5%, financing this deficit will not be straightforward. Many of Trump's policies are inherently inflationary, immigration controls and tariffs, or risk crimping government revenues by making tax cuts permanent. Convincing bond markets to fund this might yet end up to be the president's greatest challenge, and we'll discuss this and the other issues in the slides ahead. So welcome, Subitha, to 6-Minute Strategy, and I have to warn our viewers in advance, we're not quite going to make 6 minutes this time. There's so much to talk about, we might be 8, but forgive us. Let's first look quickly at markets before I come to you, just to see what they've done since that Trump election on 5th November. It's pretty well as you would have expected. Yes, Bitcoin's the star. S&P 500 growth, the next best performer, up nearly 10%. Trump's embrace of tech's been very clear. Then you get the main index and you get a 4% move higher in the dollar, move higher in 3-month bonds, but very US-centric. Everything that might come into Trump's field of view, though, from a hostile perspective, has underperformed. European equities, emerging market equities, and bottom of all, Chinese equities. Now, sitting against this, of course, we've had some good news. The cabinet that Trump has chosen looks actually to be remarkably competent, or so you think, I gather.
Yeah, so I think there were concerns that when Trump was elected, he would choose a very isolationist and ideological cabinet. But as far as his economic team is concerned, it's fairly mainstream, it's highly competent and traditionalist. So we have Kevin Hassett at the National Economic Council. He's a supply-side economist who really believes in low taxes and deregulation driving growth. There's Scott Bessent at the Treasury, a very seasoned hedge fund manager who really believes in risk management and making sure that the deficit does not spiral out of control. So there's a huge sigh of relief in terms of the long-term trajectory of the US deficit. Then there's Howard Lutnick at the Commerce Department, again, someone who doesn't really have an ideological penchant for putting through tariffs. He's quite transactional, so he will deliver what's needed. And then there's Jamieson Greer as the US trade representative. This is Robert Lighthizer, deputy from the last administration. And again, he's much more of an implementer than an ideological protectionist at heart. So a more traditional conservative supply-side cabinet.
And they'll probably act much more quickly than Washington's used to. So let's get our teeth into these executive orders. Can we kick off with deregulation? What do you see emerging from the White House?
I think there is a general consensus that the regulatory burden on US businesses has really escalated. The chart on the left shows the number of new significant rules introduced through each president's administration. And you can see Reagan was incredibly light touch. As the administrations have subsequently come, the Democrats have been much more interventionist than the Republicans. We have, really Obama introducing a whole load of raft of regulations, and that was really on the back of the financial crisis on the financial sector. And then Biden has followed suit with quite an aggressive regulatory agenda.
And you see Trump really aspiring to a light touch Reaganite sort of philosophy here.
Yes, and so the panel on the right really shows the total burden of all the regulations on US businesses. And I think Trump has really sort of taken a vow to cut this burden on American businesses. He has started with a focus on the energy sector, but I think the expectation is that he will move on from there.
So with an eye on the time, immigration, what do you feel is happening there, and how inflationary is this?
So in terms of the immigration, this featured quite heavily in his inauguration speech. He has two things he'd like to achieve. The first is seal the southern border, which he's already put into place with his executive orders. He's reinstated the Remain in Mexico policy, which means that if you want to claim asylum, you have to seek it in Mexico before entering the US. He has also put forward an executive order which allows the US government to deploy the National Guard and the military to the southern border and seal it. So I think the basic thing we take away is that the flow of immigration from the south is now going to really abate. And there's a second sort of tenet of his immigration policy, which is to deport those that have come through the last administration, which is roughly 8 to 10 million immigrants.
And that, most economists would agree, is inflationary and sharp
Yes, I think
reform.
there's a general consensus that reducing your labor force, particularly immigrants are relatively hardworking and in the labor force, that will raise wages.
Number 3, tariffs. There'll be noises on off here. Where do you think we are? How aggressive? What sort of timing?
So I think there was again a huge sigh of relief that they didn't feature on day one, apart from just threats. And this is being viewed as more transactional and potentially as a negotiation tool. But I would say we need to be cautious here. This has been a universal theme for Trump throughout the decades.
Yes.
And he views tariffs as a universal tool to raise revenues, to reindustrialize the economy, and also to create jobs. So I think it is something that delivers many of his objectives. So I would say we should wait, and watch to see how it plays out.
In the right-hand panel here, you can see what a big stick Trump's holds. If you take Mexico, for example, and look at the imports they send into the US as a percentage of their own GDP, it's a very big number. And you look at the imports that the US sends into Mexico in that red line, and it's a very, very small portion of US GDP, so that the Americans can wield the stick without really noticing it. So I think we will see some quite aggressive moves. I fear some of it may be focused on Europe.
Yes, and this is the asymmetric economic power that the US has. It is the world's largest buyer of consumer products and also the world's largest supplier of technology and possibly even energy in due course. So I think it would like to exert more market power over its trading partners.
And of course, the final point, tax cuts. What do you think the timing issues, what do you feel his policies are going to look like here?
So I think, this is a key objective for the administration. I don't think it's negotiable. He will try to extend and will achieve it, the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act for individuals. Those will happen next year. They expire in December and they'll come through, they'll be extended into the future. I think the real question is, how is he going to fund this? And that is going to be the main question for Congress, and how they're going to find the revenue, which is because the bill for extending these tax cuts is roughly $4 trillion.
Gosh. You can see on the left-hand side the updated CBO numbers. We're already nearly at 100% of GDP. That looks to rise to around about 118% of GDP by 2035. So totally unknown territory. And as you said to me, Subitha, he's going to be relying on the comfort of strangers. As you look in the right-hand panel, foreign ownership of privately held US treasuries is falling, and he needs to tempt those buyers in. So it's possible that the old bond market is actually the judge, jury, and executioner of President Trump, as you said to me earlier.
Yes, and I think this is really going to be the way we discover whether the Trump administration will be successful, whether the US can be more extractive with its trading partner in the rest of the world without really having any blowback back into the US economy via the interest rate markets.
So I hope you found that useful. It's the beginning, of course, of what will be a long-running series of topics. I'll report to you when I get back from Washington with Subitha again, and we'll look particularly at what this means for asset allocation, bonds, equity markets, and even for gold. Thank you.